it's cool to share about this work because, as you all know, sex is taboo. The pleasure gap exists because of that. And the more that we start practicing and talking about this stuff, the more we are actually rippling and changing culture. So let's do it. Let's all share about it. Okay, should we do some questions?
Let's do it. Favorite part. Any questions? I have a good one. Someone wrote in and said that they lost their virginity at 31, which they considered for them maybe late, but it had to do with a lot of, low self-confidence. And so they're wondering if they should tell their future partners about how nervous and inexperienced they are about sex, or should they just kind of go with the flow? They just feel like they don't know exactly what they like or how to communicate it. So what's your advice to maybe someone who's on the novice end?
Yeah, I think you share what you want to share. You share it when you want to share it, right? Like if you know that you're like, I really want to feel like present, maybe you want to say like, hey, so I'm not super experienced. You don't have to be like, hey, I just had sex for the first time yesterday, but you can be like, hey, so I don't necessarily know about all these positions. And even if you wanted to use it in a way of keeping it cute, you're like, hey, I've never tried this position. Would you like to try it with me? Oh. So they're like, ooh, you want to do something specific with me? And maybe you're like, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out if I like it. Right? Like you are totally in charge, but you also don't have to share any information with anyone that you don't feel comfortable with.
Ditto.
Another one. Good answer. This is from another friend out there. I have a disability and use a wheelchair. With a new partner, how can I communicate what I can and can't do in terms of different positions, but still keep the mood sexy? Any advice would be amazing.
Yeah, I would say have the conversation before you're in the act. Right? So then once you're there, they're already like, I already know how I'm about to fuck this up. We about to have the best time, right? Like have the conversation also outside of the bedroom. Sometimes having conversations outside of the bedroom it's a weird pressure that we put on ourselves. So like have it in the living room or something like that, like a neutral space, and sharing like, hey, here's the positions that feel good for me and will allow me to enjoy our time together. But yeah, totally, you have all the fucking you want, damn it. But having that conversation outside of the bedroom and before you start the act.
Nice. It sounds like a sexual cheat sheet would be helpful in that moment.
Exactly. Also, before I go to this next question, I thought about the first question. I feel like it goes for the opposite. If you're not a novice and you're really experienced, you also don't owe anyone explaining how many partners you've had sex with or your sexual past if you don't.
Never.
Okay. But another question is, any particular advice for communicating desire and preferences as a trans person? They're generally, used to kind of talking and walking through everything that's pleasurable, but it's any particular language that you could advise them to use?
Use the language that feels good for you. If you are the trans person, you know the best language that feels good for you, that allows you to feel safe, right? Like you know what you call your genitals. Don't allow someone else to be like, I'm gonna call it this. Absolutely not. If that doesn't feel good for you, use the terminology and the verbiage and the language that feels good for your body. And again, cheat sheets. If you're like, I am stressed out before we get here, be like, hey, so I love it when I am getting, penetrated and you call my vulva a pussy. Like, woo, right? Like if that feels good for you, cool. So I think navigating and figuring out what language feels good for you. And if you are a person that is with a partner that is trans, ask them. Asking people is great. Like, hey, what is there certain terminology or like, what do you like your genitals called?
Absolutely.
How do you suggest getting more comfortable with dirty talk in bed?
Practice.
But where do you practice? How do you practice?
Okay, so there's so many ways. I think mirror work is so great all the time because you can also practice like how you visually look. I carry my emotions in my face. And so sometimes I'm like, ooh, don't do that one. Nope, we're gonna practice our face. Also, we all have smartphones, record it and then listen back to it and be like, ooh, I hate the way I sound there, but ooh, I like the way I said it there. This is how I'm gonna say it so I feel powerful when I say it.
Yes. I hate listening to my voice back. It's honestly, whew.
But we have to because we got podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one thing with editing podcasts. It's like, ooh, got to get used to it.
Yeah.
What are some good ways to ask potential sex partners about STD results or getting tested?
Yeah. I love to ask up front and just be like, hey, so when was the last time that you had an STI test? Here's mine. Like sometimes it helps to be like, here's when I got tested. And they're like, oh, okay, so you're not just judging me. Because a lot of times society thinks we're just judging each other when we're just like, no, I'm just trying to stay safe so we can really do all the things we want to do. But you can offer up like, hey, how do you feel about testing? I just got tested. When was the last time you did? So you're also telling your business and asking the question, kind of feeling out how they respond all at the same time.
Side note, does anyone have any favorite easy ways to get tested?
Are you asking us?
Yeah, I'm asking my two friends on stage here.
Oh, I was like, what are they saying?
I mean, or put it in the chat. But no, I mean, do you use any of the at-home tests? Do you just go to your normal doctor? You go to Planned Parenthood? You go to a clinic? What do you both like?
All the above.
All of the above.
Whatever you need.
Yeah, I mean, I've grown up, a broke college student because I like to be in school my whole life. Planned Parenthood is great. Also, like having like somewhat of insurance, which I also understand that sometimes insurance and affordability is a privilege. And as we keep funding fucking Planned Parenthood if they don't fuck it up. Utilizing Planned Parenthood is great. You can get supplies, you can get lubes and condoms while you're there as well. And they're also really supportive because they know sometimes how hard it is to just come in and get that test. And they're not going to shame you like some lady tried me. And she did.
Wow. At Planned Parenthood or somewhere
No,
else?
at my regular doctor, she was like, maybe we should try to not have as much sex. And I was like, maybe you should mind your business, ma'am. And clearly I am here for a reason. Thank you. Do this test.
Yeah, nah, we're not here for that. Mm-mm.
Rude.
No sex shame.
Jimanekia, a few people, I know you mentioned the word trauma and that's one of your specialties. A few people were wondering, did you just mean sexual trauma? They knew that you had alluded to other kinds. Can you kind of talk about different kinds of trauma, how it affects communication, and how it might make you feel like your voice doesn't matter?
Yeah, trauma isn't just sexual. There's emotional trauma, right? Like someone can have been controlling your emotions, be like, if you don't do this, I won't love you, blah, blah, blah. There's physical trauma, which we all know, someone putting their hands on you, which also can cause you to freak out in bed if there's certain positions, right? And positions can be from sexual trauma and physical trauma. Emotional, spiritual trauma can be using the Lord against you. And if they say like certain things can be really, really, really hard. So I think that when we talk about trauma, folks just go to like sexual trauma or just assault or rape. No, trauma can be in so many different ways. Also just PTSD in general. Maybe you've been in the war, which also doesn't just have to do with war, right? But that's a thing that people also don't talk about. Loud noises can cause trauma, certain sounds, certain colors. So there's different things that can not cause trauma, but can trigger the things that have happened to you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Those fireworks in Brooklyn, if anyone lives in Brooklyn, were traumatic. I'll say.
I heard they were wild.
Yes. Do you have any advice or tips for people who find that they always have to initiate sex, or maybe they communicate their desires to their partner, but still finding that they have to then go and make it happen?
That sounds hard. Just out the gate, I want to acknowledge that that's hard, that maybe you feel like you're doing all the work. I would have a conversation with my partner, right? Like I would check in with them and be like, hey, so I would love that if you set up a date for us. Even just be like, hey, can you do this thing? I would love it if you chose this thing. So sometimes giving people, also allowing them to give themselves permission. Permission is something I talk about often, is like giving yourself permission to say yes, to say no, to ask for the things you need. And it sounds like you need someone else to allow you to take a breath and just be in the moment versus like planning the situation.
Mm.
Couple quick quickies that I'm just going to throw out there. What was the name of the communication quiz?
Communication styles. You just Google that.
Person. Wait, that's what it is. Communication. Okay, just a couple quickies before back to you. Where'd you get your glasses?
Ooh, yes, honey. Wearlight. I'm gonna put it in the chat. Wearlight.com. There you go. Oops, I spelled it wrong. Don't listen to me.
Ooh, and here's one more thing. When's a good time to bring up and or send the cheat sheet? Can you model a good way to do it?
So the way I just did it, I knew we were already going to have sex. We've been tested for Rona and STIs because that's what we got to get tested for these days. And I was just sitting down and I just typed it. So for me, I would say type it up, whatever you want to type it up, and send it before you are in person with them. It could be the day before, it could be hours before. Maybe you want to give them at least 24 hours to digest to see if they can show up in this way for you, and or pick and choose so they also don't feel like there's pressure. And if it's a partner that you are already with and you're just like, hey honey, got a little surprise, I would love for you to try these things, or I love when you do these things, or these right here is how you make me scream from the high heavens. So you can present it when you want to, just don't present it right before you get into the bedroom or the sofa, the bathroom, wherever. Live your life.
This is a good one. I feel like this can apply to my sex life. If you've been having sex with a person for quite a while, say you're comfortable with each other, how do you insert new boundaries? Like if your boundaries have changed or shifted, how do you kind of insert new ones?
Yeah, so I like to do relationship check-ins. I'm like a quarterly check-in kind of girl, and just be like, hey, let's just hang out and can we just like check in? And that's when I'm like, I love that we get to do these things. I'm feeling like maybe we can, for me, like restructuring some things, and then I would share my new boundaries. So kind of maybe I'm like sugarcoating it a little bit in the beginning just to kind of like ease them in, because most times when people are like, hey, can we have a conversation, people go, what do we got to talk about? Oh god, I'm freaking out. So just be like, hey, can we just have like a check-in? And then here's what I'm feeling like. I would love to restructure this in this way. I love what you're doing here. Can maybe we add this, or maybe can we change this?
Thank you. I know a lot of people said this in the chat. What if you and your partner have different erotic blueprints or love languages?
Yeah, well, first we got to figure that out. So learn that first, and then see where you plug in. So your love languages are probably going to be different, but just learning how they like to receive is like a thing, right? Just knowing how they like to receive love and feel seen, supported, and heard, as I always say. That's great. And then you can also tell them the thing. You don't need to have the same love language as your partner. You don't, not by any means, but you just need to know how they like to receive that affirmation, that connection, so they feel present to you. And the erotic parts, see how you mesh, right? Like there can be certain overlaps. Most of us are overlappers, and there are folks that lean heavier in one area, but most of us overlap. So see where your overlaps are and have conversations. And sometimes there's things that we didn't even know we liked that we're like, ooh, I didn't know that was an option. Sometimes there's just shit out there you don't know is an option. And you can communicate that and share that with your partner. So maybe you can build a whole new thing that you get to enjoy and love together.
Speaking of receiving, because you spoke about that a lot, someone is really curious of ways that they can be better at receiving compliments, but not being during sex.
Yeah.
Like, maybe what are some good like ways to respond if someone compliments you during sex where you're not like totally embarrassed?
Okay, fun fact. Words of affirmation is my jam, but also the hardest thing for me to receive. So,
receive them.
Huh?
You can give.
Oh yeah, all day. So I have had people in my life that know this about me, and they're like, I'm gonna love bomb you a little bit, and I'm gonna just tell you all these great things. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready. Ugh. So having someone, maybe you just sit down and they just tell you all these great things about you, and you kind of sit with that feeling in your body and be like, why am I fighting this so much? What is it? A lot of times it goes back to shame and guilt for the ways that people told us that we should be seen, or the way we shouldn't be seen, or our desires or whatever. But practice receiving the information, having people that really mean it, not just make shit up and be like, yeah, you cool and shit. I like when you do this thing. No, like, and then maybe even again, taking the pressure out of the bedroom, maybe having you and your partner do this on the sofa. Just be like, hey, can we figure out can you just tell me nice things? And then see how that feels. And you can also be like, okay, that's enough. Let's tap out. Yeah. And maybe ease into it and practice a little bit more.
I'm going to try that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Here's someone who has a history of abusing their partner. They are in treatment, and their partner is also a survivor of past abusive relationships. So their sex life is a pain point because it can be triggering for her, the survivor, and also this person who's hesitant to initiate because of their own issues with intimacy. So in addition to, with their own issues of intimacy, in addition to the history of abusive behavior, do you have recommendations for resources to help them navigate their sex life as they're growing and starting anew?
I would recommend a support group. And people are like, what, a fucking support group? Yes, because then you get to recognize some of the things within yourself that you don't see with other people, and you get to talk it out in like a safe space. Also, yes, treatment. Treatments are great. Also, there are Al-Anon, CODA, like there's so many different types of anonymous support groups, again, that you can try out. Therapy's great, counselors are great. Finding folks that help you to navigate where your own trauma comes from, and then each person taking the time to work on their own shit and then doing work together. Again, having these conversations and navigating in low pressure situations are going to allow you to be able to hear each other. We're not having these conversations in the bedrooms. And also maybe bringing in just like a mediator, just so each person can get what they're trying to say across. But kudos to you for getting support and for knowing these things. But there's so many different support groups. And again, everything's online. I love it. Getting a therapist, again, I also know that's a goddamn privilege. But if you have insurance, lean into it because you pay for it.
Thank you.
We have an interesting question of someone is asking how to sensitively suggest to, in this case, their girlfriend to be more present during sex. They've been active for 2 years, but she just stares at the ceiling and tries to focus on the sex. She rarely makes eye contact unless she's giving me a blowjob. So what are some ways to maybe suggest being more engaging?
Yeah, it sounds like mama's got some struggles happening. It sounds like she's not present in her own right. So who knows? I wouldn't just walk in and be like, hey, so can you stop staring at shit and look here? No. But again, having a conversation, be like, hey, can we just check in? Like, I noticed like during sex, like this is coming up for you. And maybe even asking like, is there a way that I can support you better? Is there a way that I can assist you? Or like, would you like to talk about what's coming up for you? Right? How often do people just notice things and never ask their partners what's happening? You can be that partner that's like, hey, I noticed a thing. Like, I just wanted to check in with you because I want us to really connect and enjoy the sex we're having and be present. So like, again, communication, it's your best friend. But yeah, ask them, sit down and just have a conversation. It doesn't have to be like, hey, you do this thing all the time, I hate it. But like, hey, I noticed this was happening. Is there a way that I can support you better? So that also lets her know like you're not coming at her in like a shameful or a aggressive way, that you're just like, hey, I just noticed and I want to show up better for us.
I love that. It's so much easier not to get defensive if someone comes at you that way.
You're like, oh, fuck, you want to help me.
A couple people were asking who have experienced trauma. Two things. One, how do you recommend good tips on just disclosing or communicating that you have previous sexual trauma to a new partner. That's one question. And then, let's start there.
There you go. I was like, just do that one. Okay. So what I always say again with disclosing how many partners you've had or how long you've been active, you tell people when you're ready to and if you want to. And then when you have those conversations, especially around trauma, I like to do what I call tester questions first, right? So I like to test how you respond to things. I'm like, yeah, I'm in therapy. How do you feel about therapy? Yeah, I love to read and communicate. What do you You don't. Okay. So if I'm asking these questions and I already see like we're not on the same page, I'm not going to disclose something that makes me feel vulnerable. Now, if you feel comfortable with this person and you're like, I would like to share this, again, non-bedroom, neutral space where you feel comfortable, do it in your own time, in your own space. You just be like, hey, I would love to share a hard thing. And you can also preface it in what I'm going to share with you. It's a hard thing for me. I always preface what I'm going to say a hard thing. And also, if I get overwhelmed, I may have to stop. So you don't put all the pressure on yourself of like, I have to say everything right now. Like, I might have to stop and we may have to check in again and then kind of see where they are. And if they're like, cool, right? Like if this is someone you've been with, you kind of have a feel for who they are. If it's a new person, give those questions, the feeler questions, just kind of see how they respond to things and see how they show up for people. And if they're able to, right? Another thing that I do, first date, everybody don't do this if it's taking a lot of work. Sometimes I'm like, so what do you think you shouldn't tell me that might make me leave this date? People go, what? And what? I'm like, okay, I'll go first. And they're like, what? And so I'm like, yeah, so I am non-monogamous, I'm queer, I'm a sexual assault survivor, I do this work, blah, blah, blah. And you kind of see people like exhale a little bit because most of the time what people think is their worst quality or the worst thing isn't even that bad. So it also allows you to opt in and out. And again, you don't have to add the survivor part in there. You can opt in with whatever things that you think and then see how they respond to that. And then you can come back and add in. So it's kind of like a touch and feel thing.
Super helpful. Thank you.
What do you think, Lauren? Should we do one more or?
We got one more.
How should you communicate sexual pain? So maybe it does when it feels the opposite of feeling good. How do you communicate that?
Yeah. If you are in the moment, just be like, hey, can we switch positions? If you don't have the full verbiage, ask to switch positions. If it's someone you're comfortable with, hey, that hurts. Ouch. Sometimes a good ouch, just out loud. People are like, what? Ouch, not good. No, hate it. Ouch. A tap. So you're getting their attention because maybe someone is so into what they're doing, they're not noticing. But switching positions, asking like, hey, can you slow down? Maybe it's the speed or the depth. So maybe also naming exactly what the thing is. Right? And if it's like, oh, or I'm not against this, but can you do less of this?
Yes.
More of this, less of this. Yes. Folks like directions also. Can you do more of that thing? Love it, love it, love it. Less of this. So it's kind of, again, we're just tempering it for the things that we really want and love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So helpful. I cannot believe how many things we learned about communication. If you're still out there, no, there's a lot of you still out there, but for all those who are still out there, what is one really important thing that you're going to take away tonight about communication and improving that in your life and your sex life? Tell the chat if you have access to the chat.
Cheat sheets, yes. Take the quizzes.
Homework.
They're free, they're online.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
Cheat sheet. We should post our cheat sheets.
Ooh.
Y'all trying to get me in trouble. You're trying to get me in trouble.
I love that actually.
Oh yes, butt punching. Before we go, it is literal punching of the fattier parts of your butt. So it's like a thuddy hit. For those that like impact play, there's stingy versus thuddy. Here, it's a little stingier, thuddier. So I like pressure. Even if you're just touching me, like I said, this, I hate you. This, I'm like, oh my God. Right? So also learning what you like for your body.
Amazing. And can you also talk about the homework one more time? I think a couple people, so the cheat sheet is the homework.
Cheat sheet is the homework. So the cheat sheet, you can call it whatever you want. I just call it a cheat sheet. But it's where you put down the things that you know are going to let you fully enjoy the sexiness in that moment. Like things that you're like, this makes me come, this makes me giggle, this is my jam, love these things. So we're giving people the tools to show up for us without the guessing. And then you can send it to people, you can write it out. Mama likes to put things on her phone, to do a little copy paste, send. Perfect.
Those mouths don't get fed, okay?
Yeah. And again, you get to show up and love it. You're like, oh, you already know, thank you.
If anyone needs help getting to know their pleasure for their cheat sheet, you can watch class 1, which we did last week with Maisha Battle, who's all of our friends. It's recorded on playboy.com, on pleasureforall.com. This one is also being recorded and will be up and available within a couple days. Jimanekia Eborn, thank you so much for teaching us today, for throwing it down, for listening to everyone, for creating a safe space. Raise your hand if you love Jimanekia.
I love me.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you to Penda Jai, who is the founder of I Am Pro Ho, which is they advocate for self-pleasure as a means of social equity, radically standing for Black sexual wellness. Yes. So you can follow I'm Pro Ho on Instagram, follow Jimanekia on Instagram. Who else are we thanking?
Playboy for having us.
Playboy, you are the greatest, the first. We're so grateful for this partnership and for you making this education accessible. Everyone, tonight is one night, but it's going to live on the website for a long time. Check out their products on pleasureforall.com. You can put this on your genitals and have extra warm arousal. There's also a bath bomb.
That bath bomb is amazing. I used it at my getaway this weekend. I said, woo!
Bath bomb. Yeah, so thanks for being a leader in sexual wellness. Playboy, if you're out there, we love you. And everyone, we're Allbodies. We have a huge library of sex education classes with some of the people that you've met tonight, or with Jimanekia, and we're gonna try and get in the future. Sign up for a free membership, allbodies.com. Do your homework. Come next week to round 3. What's happening next week? What are we doing? Do you guys know? It's practice. So it's all about technique, and we're gonna have a really special instructor with us. So we'd love to see you. Tell your friends.